Hello, welcome to Rocktown History. So happy to see you all came in out of the heat. It's nice and cool today. We have had summers in here when the AC doesn't work. And then we have a big fundraising campaign. Just kidding. I'm Penny Imison, very happy to welcome you to Rocktown History for tonight's Third Thursday talk. But first, I'd like to give a couple of previews of upcoming programs. We have been packing the calendar, and I'm doing my very best to try to keep the website updated. Normally, I would say, check the website. I'll check on that hopefully tomorrow to see if everything's up to date for the next month, or at least a few weeks. But I will point out that next week, our popular coffee mill will be with Chaz Haywood and Megan Pullen from the county courthouse. So they're bringing the Clerk's Corner. If you read that article in the Daily News Record, that series that their office puts out, I'm not sure what they're going to talk about, but they always have something fun about historic preservation. And next Friday evening from 5 to 7 is our open house. We are having fourth Fridays this summer, July through September. And it's just another opportunity to come in. We have some special activities. The theme is going to be Jazzy July, so sort of a little 1920s pop-up museum, some music in the galleries, and we'd love to have you come by between 5 and 7 to start your weekend. And then I'm going to jump into August and give a little plug for our Ask an Author on Friday, August the 8th at 10:30 in the morning. Terry Barkley is coming. This has been a series of presentations and conversations with local authors, learning more about their writing process. So if you're interested in writing, it's a great opportunity to talk about behind the scenes stuff. But if you're just interested in what they write about, it's another great opportunity to learn some local history. So I think that's enough for today. Oh, no. So we have some membership forms in the seats. If you are not a member, we encourage you to fill one out, consider joining us. The membership here is so faithful and really forms the backbone of the financing that we need to have these programs free for everybody and do the work that we do to save and share our rich local history. If you are a member, you could take it along and pass it on to a friend or give a gift membership. Wouldn't that be nice? So just a little plug, and maybe there were a few little bookmarks. If you don't have a bookmark, then we'll try to get some more. All right. This evening, we are very happy to talk about the Lincoln Homestead. How many people have visited the Lincoln Homestead? Okay, so we have some people who are familiar with the house and some people who aren't, so that's great for you. We're very happy that Sarah Bixler is here. I'll just give a really quick bio and then let her talk and share about the restoration of the property. Reverend Dr. Sarah Ann Bixler is Associate Dean of the Seminary and Associate Professor of Formation and Practical Theology at Eastern Mennonite University. She holds a PhD and Master of Divinity from Princeton Theological Seminary and a BA in English and Secondary Education from Eastern Mennonite University. Sarah and Benjamin Bixler, along with their 3 children and Benjamin's parents, steward and live at the historic Lincoln Homestead. So this is a totally firsthand account. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Penny. It's so good to be here with you all. Many thanks to Andrea for facilitating this invitation for me to be here and share with you about the restoration and something I've come to really understand as restoration at the Lincoln Homestead, a historic state and national landmark here, not far, just a few miles north in Linville, Virginia. You can find the house situated right along Route 42. If you haven't seen it before, I hope you will drive by. There's a historical marker in the front yard placed by the Virginia Department of Historic Resources. So I'm Sarah, my spouse is Benjamin. He's at home with some of our children this evening, and the 5 of us live in this 4,000 square foot historic house that was, first part of it was built in 1800, and my spouse's parents, Lee and Mary Bixler, live in a separate home that they constructed on the property, which in its current form is 9¼ acres. A lot smaller than it was in 1768 when the Lincolns first settled here in the Shenandoah Valley. So this is a picture of the house in November of 2019 when we purchased the Lincoln Homestead property. The house had not been lived in for a period of 20 years. It had been for sale on the housing market for 5 years before we purchased it. I love to hear from folks who looked through the house and considered whether they might want to purchase it and decided against it. We meet a lot of people like that, recognizing how much work and labor it was going to take and how much investment of time and resources it would take to make it inhabitable again. And so my spouse and I were brave enough, or maybe naive enough, whatever you might want to say, some of both, to be willing to take on that project. And as people of faith, we have actually come to see it as a calling to work in justice and truth-telling and restoration that is important to who we are as well. Now let's see if I can make this clicker work. All right, I need some. Where in the room should I aim? Okay, all right. Oh, hey, now it is. Thank you, great. All right. So let's see. Yeah, great. So I have a timeline here put together. And I mentioned that the year is 1768 when John and Rebecca Lincoln settled on the Linville Creek from Berks County, Pennsylvania. There we go. And they had a tract of land that was about 600 acres. It didn't technically at that time include the spot where the Lincoln Homestead house now stands. It was slightly to the north of that. And they built a log cabin there and settled with some of their children were young adult and some were teenage and childhood years. So they had a variety of ages there. Their oldest child was Abraham, the grandfather of the president. So Abraham and some of his brothers fought in the American Revolution, and as compensation for Abraham's military service, he received a tract of land in Kentucky, which at the time was a county of Virginia. And so it was because of that the presidential family line left Linville. So Captain Abraham, as we call him, the grandfather of the president, and his wife Bathsheba moved the family to Kentucky. This was after their child Thomas was born while they were still in Linville, the father of the president. Did you know that President Abraham Lincoln's own father was born in the Linville area along the Linville Creek? And so they moved, Thomas was about 5 or 6 years old at the time that they moved to Kentucky. Captain Abraham's youngest brother, Jacob, the great uncle of the president, stayed in the area. He purchased a tract of land just adjacent to his parents' farm, and that's where he had what we know as the Lincoln Homestead built and finished in approximately the year 1800. He also had served in the American Revolution, and he built a house that was significantly more grand, and it was bigger and more impressive than other houses that his family members were living in the Linville area. It was a house in the Federal style. As you see the pictures of the front of the Lincoln Homestead, that's pretty similar to how it looked when it was finished in about the year 1800. And Jacob and Rebecca had a number of children. One of them was also named Abraham. So it's a little hard to keep them straight. The grandfather of the president is referred to as Captain Abraham. The cousin of the president is referred to as Colonel Abraham. And his wife, Mary, not to be confused with the presidential couple. Colonel Abraham and Mary then moved into the Lincoln Homestead house after their parents died, and they decided to build an additional structure because by that time, the property was a very large, active plantation. So the Lincolns in Virginia were slaveholders. Meanwhile, their cousin in the White House would eventually send troops in the Civil War with the conflict here. And so Colonel Abraham and Mary had a separate structure built immediately behind the house that was for the purposes of cooking and living quarters for enslaved persons who were enslaved there at the plantation at the time. And I forgot, the president was born in 1809, so about 9 years after the house here was finished. And then eventually in 1874, after Mary, who was widowed by that time, when she passed away, the house was sold outside of the Lincoln family. So the house was in the Lincoln ownership from 1800 to 1874. And then in the next era of the Lincoln Homestead story, the house underwent a number of architectural changes. So I want to acknowledge that the Lincolns weren't the first people to live on the Linville Creek, to inhabit this place. We don't know for certain which specific indigenous groups would have been moving and living along the Linville Creek. However, something that is important to understand is that in the late 1880s and early 1890s, there was an excavation of an indigenous burial mound on the banks of the Linville Creek, basically right across Route 42 from where the Lincoln Homestead stands. And there were estimated to be at least 800 persons who were buried there in the burial mound that was excavated in the late 1880s. And here is an excerpt from a report that includes dozens of pages and some pictures of some artifacts that were excavated there by the Smithsonian. This is the oldest picture of the Lincoln Homestead that I have been able to find. There's probably a copy of it here, I would imagine. This particular picture I found in the John Wayland collection in the Historical Library in Winchester. And it was taken before 1874 because we believe that Mary Lincoln, you can't see this very clearly, is standing in the front yard along with an unknown male relative. So this represents the house when the 1800s portion was built. And if you have looked closely at the house as it is today, you might notice that the front porch is a lot smaller in this picture than it is today. That was one of the changes that was made after the house transferred ownership out of the Lincoln family. In the rear L of the buildings, there are two very tall chimneys. You can see them on the back on the right-hand side. This is not actually a whole connected house as it is today. It's two separate structures. So the front portion that was built in 1800 with 5 windows across the front was the original house. The second structure in the back with 2 chimneys was the house that was built in the 1840s, or the structure built in the 1840s for cooking and for living quarters for enslaved persons. Here's a picture of the house that was on the publicity for this talk this evening, for this engagement, that represents a picture in the early 1900s of the house. So you can see the changes to the porch, and the rear structure became connected to the original house, so that it's like an L shape instead of 2 structures.
Is that a slate roof on the original?
What did you say?
Is that a slate roof on the original?
It appears to me to be wood shake shingles. I'm not sure. Yeah. Yeah, good question. The question was, is it a slate roof? When I look at it closely, it seems to me like wood shingles. So because this house belonged to the Lincolns, and the Lincolns were a very prominent family in the Shenandoah Valley, and there are many historical reasons to keep their records, there are a lot of records that exist about this property and about the Lincoln family. The Lincoln Society of Virginia has been very generous in showing to us, as there is an example in the top picture, a lot of records that have been preserved from the Lincolns. And so what there is there, as that you can see, is a receipt for payment in the 1850s by Abram Lincoln. So he's using a shortened version of his full name, Abraham. And he is paying taxes on 11 enslaved persons over the age of 12 in this particular year, as well as some taxes for furniture and livestock. There are dozens of these annual tax receipts. And what, as my spouse Benjamin and I had an opportunity to look through these, what we discovered was that in any given year during those plantation years, the Lincolns were paying taxes on somewhere between 10 and 18 enslaved persons over the age of 12. And if you think about what you might know of the legacy of slavery in the United States, there were many, many more people under the age of 12 who we would expect to have been living at the Lincoln plantation as well. So our best guess is that in any given year, there were at least 25 enslaved persons who were living and working at the Lincoln Homestead, likely more, because when we read the names, there are children listed numerically, and there are a number of women who are listed as well, so we can assume that there were families who were enslaved families who were living there. The lower picture is a picture of a marker that was placed in the early 1900s by a Lincoln family descendant in honor of the last surviving persons who were enslaved at the Lincoln Homestead. A married couple named Ned and Queen. And this marker is inside the Lincoln family cemetery that's on the property. The cemetery includes 5 generations of Lincolns, starting with the president's great-grandparents, John and Rebecca, who are buried there. And by the way, even though our family lives in the house, and so we don't, invite people in who knock on the door without notice, the cemetery is always open to visitors. If you are interested in visiting, we welcome you to do so. So this marker is placed inside the fence of the Lincoln family cemetery. And because of that, in talking with Dr. Phil Stone, the president of the Lincoln Society of Virginia, we agree that it's unlikely that Ned and Queen actually are buried in this location. We don't know their final resting place. But this is a stone that honors them. As Benjamin and I have done reading and research in a variety of documents and records, we started to compile a list of persons who were named, first name only, as enslaved by the Lincolns. These include people who were often named in some of the Lincoln family members' wills and were treated as property to be sold or gifted. And so I share these names with you as a way to represent the story of many people who have lived at this place in addition to the Lincoln family. I think, I don't know. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's information about Squire that is a story about his life that is detailed on our website if you're interested in reading more. Mm-hmm. I'd like to talk a little bit about restoring now. When Benjamin and I purchased the Lincoln Homestead in 2019, we knew that it was a former plantation. It says that on the historical marker in the front yard. We could see the stone in the cemetery honoring Ned and Queen. And in talking to folks in the area, our impression was that there were not huge plantations in the Shenandoah Valley like there were in some of the other parts of Virginia. This is kind of a narrative that as we talk to folks who would have gone through the public school system in Rockingham County in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, they share with us that this was what they had been taught. In fact, so much so that when they have learned about some of the history, the Lincoln Homestead, it's kind of surprising, particularly surprising that there were dozens of enslaved persons at the Lincoln Homestead. The narrative that has often been told is that slavery wasn't really a significant part of life in the Shenandoah Valley. And we thought, because for a number of years, the first mention that we could find of an enslaved person in the Lincoln family records was in the 1820s, when the couple who had the house built in 1800 received as a gift from the in-laws, from Dorcas Robinson's parents, 3 enslaved persons, along with a gift of several pieces of furniture. Well, what Sydney Ring found when she was doing her master's degree in history at JMU just a couple of years ago was that there were actually additional tax records that we had never seen, and she found them here in the circuit court office that show that in 1790, Jacob Lincoln paid taxes on 3 enslaved persons who were above age 12, but younger than age 16. So in 1790, Jacob Lincoln owned 3 adolescents who were enslaved by him. And their names are listed in the lower document: Phyllis, Kate, and Spencer. So what this suggests to me is that if Jacob Lincoln was holding Phyllis, Kate, and Spencer in 1790 as teenagers, 10 years later, when the house was finished in 1800, there almost certainly was forced labor that went into the building of that house. When we bought the house we fought, this didn't become a plantation until maybe 2 decades after it was built. So that was new information that caused us to even experience the house differently that our family was living in, recognizing that much of the construction probably happened at the expense of enslaved laborers. Some of you may know Dale McAllister. Is Dale here this evening? I did not see him. Okay. May know Dale McAllister and the book that he wrote on Lucy Sims. One very special part of the story of the Lincoln Homestead that he shared with us from his research is that, oh, excuse me, my slide added another line. Lucy Frances Sims. Frances Sims should be over on the right-hand side. Lucy Frances Sims, pictured on the right, a very well-known African-American educator here in Harrisonburg, was the granddaughter named for her grandmother Lucinda of a woman who was once enslaved at the Lincoln Homestead, who later moved to the Gray Plantation, where she was enslaved in the Harrisonburg area, and became a cook there. But previously, she was at the Lincoln Homestead in Linville. And so it's significant to us as we think about the 3rd generation from people who were connected to or who lived in the Lincoln Homestead, to think about Lucy Frances Sims as a granddaughter of Lucinda, who was enslaved at the Lincoln Homestead, and President Abraham Lincoln, who was not quite a grandson, but his great uncle was Jacob. And so to think about what happened in the span of 3 generations. This is a picture that was shared with us from 2 sisters who grew up at the Lincoln Homestead in a later era, starting in the 1930s. Their names, they're pictured as the 2 small children in this photo. Margaret and Mildred Reynolds was their maiden name, and they moved to the Lincoln Homestead with their family when they were just turning 1 year old. And they lived there, both of them lived there for about 20 years. Well, we had the delightful opportunity to meet them on several occasions, to learn more about the history of the Lincoln Homestead and what their experiences were like growing up there in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. Margaret has now passed, and Mildred is still living. We also were very interested to find some pencil writing on the walls, on the plaster in the house. Here's one picture of an example of that. Remember July 10, 1909, Irma and Clemmy, when the party was at the Glen. This is on the wall in my daughter's bedroom, and I just love to imagine what girl or young woman might have wanted to remember a social event, or I don't know what might have gone on at the party at the Glen in 1909. But that's a special reminder that many people in a variety of experiences of joy and challenge have lived at the Lincoln Homestead over the centuries. After Benjamin and I purchased the Lincoln Homestead, we had an open house. Penny referenced, maybe some of you have been to the house before, and we thought, wow, this is an important historical house in the Shenandoah Valley. We had purchased it, and we were starting to hear some feedback of, oh, I have a connection to that house. I visited there when I was a child. Oh, I've driven past that house so many times. I know it well. And we wanted to have the opportunity for people in the community to walk through the house again, because we had heard that no one had been in the house for decades. So on President Abraham Lincoln's birthday, February 12, 2020, we opened the house up and expected that, maybe a couple dozen people would show up. a few of you were there. We think somewhere between 600 and 800 people walked through the house that day. Penny was there with us, and we were standing for hours greeting folks at the door. People came. This is a picture of Mildred, who came back having grown up in the house. And there were many folks who were showing us photographs of when they were a child and they had been there. It was such a special moment for us. And then we had a couple more open houses throughout the years after that. And being here tonight reminds me that we should schedule another one again. The Daily News Record put us on the front page, so I guess that was a pretty big deal for our area. We had a second open house we planned a second open house, and we had to cancel it because of COVID. This is an article advertising the second open house and showing the pictures of how many people came to the first one. So what the DNR said is, if you didn't get to visit it in February, come back in April. We couldn't do it because you remember what was going on in April of 2020. It wasn't safe. So we're grateful that we could have the one open house early, and then we had more later on. An interesting aspect of our experience finding our way through this restoration of the Lincoln Homestead is that people said to us, oh, this is so interesting. This is such an important work that you're doing. You should contact somebody to put this on TV. And so we actually reached out to a couple of production companies just to say, this is what our family's planning to do. We're going to do most of the work by ourselves because we have construction skills. There are 3 generations of Bixlers who are working on this project together. And we actually had a production company that put together a video pitch to some different television companies for us, and they were pitching this idea. And as I mentioned, then COVID shut so many things down. So we had actually gotten through the first round of the Magnolia series, Chip and Joanna Gaines, of possibly being interested in doing some episodes on this project when we were told nobody's sending filming crews anywhere because everything is shutting down for COVID. Well, we took that opportunity when our children were not able to go to school every day. They are in the building, they were online. My spouse and I were both teaching at seminary and university settings, and our teaching went online. We realized that was an opportunity to use some of that time that we had found as a family to work diligently on the house. So we, okay, oh, my slides are a little out of order. I'll show you a little bit later where we lived while we did the work. This is some of the work that we had to do. Here is a picture of a portion of the brick wall that's exposed behind the trim. You can see the plaster breaking away on the left-hand side. This is the condition of a lot of spots in the exterior wall of the house. The house is built with 2 or 3 layers of brick and then plaster smeared on the inside. Here's another example of a rotted out windowsill. There are 8 fireplaces in the house. That was the only source of heating when we purchased it. So very quickly, as we realized the extent of the repair, we realized that we had to figure out our philosophy of how we were going to approach this process. And so we began learning about definitions and categories in historic preservation and restoration. On the one hand, we really wanted to honor and have fidelity to the original woodworking in the way that the house was made. On the other hand, many changes had been made over 200 years. And so we weren't always even sure what was original and what wasn't. Secondly, we realized that this house was built in 1800 with 8 fireplaces. Living in 2020 and beyond, there are other ways that we want to heat this home. And it also would be a good idea to have some cooling, a cooling system in it as well. Well, where are we going to put that stuff? We don't want it to look like a modern house. And then there was also the recognition that not everything about this property is something that we want to continue. There are injustices that happened here. We don't want to venerate the Lincolns to such an extent that we forget the rest of the history of this place. And so Benjamin and I ended up striking a balance probably somewhere between preservation and renovation, which is not on the list of historic approaches. Recognizing that we wanted to put some modern systems in the house. We decided, for instance, that's where we lived when we were working on the house. We parked an RV on the property. So 5 of us lived in that RV. And as you can imagine, we didn't spend much time in there, basically sleeping. So one thing that we decided to do was to rebuild walls inside the whole exterior of the house because the plaster was crumbling and would take a lot to repair. And then after it would be repaired, the house still wouldn't be insulated. And so we elected sometimes for sustainability and for modern comfort over maintaining the house exactly as it may have been in 1800 or 1840. We had to do a lot of work shoring up the floor systems, and there was termite damage and a lot of water damage in the house as well, as you can see in these pictures. One of my favorite memories is when we were in one of the rooms in the first floor, which is the picture at the top and the center, and we realized, oh, there's a hole in the floor from the water coming in from the window right here. It ate away a hole in the floor, and we looked down, and you could see the floor joist, and it's just sitting on the ground, and we realized there's no basement under 3/4 of this house. So then we began doing some digging where we had to pull up floorboards from above because there was too much water damage and we needed to repair. Then we were able to dig down with shovels. So the middle picture in the lower portion of this slide shows you how we had dug under the floor system from above and shoveled out dirt with buckets to be able to then lay some plastic and insulation there so that the moisture wouldn't keep wicking up from the soil into the floor system. Just some of the adventures that we had. All right, I'm checking my time. Great, almost there. This is some of the process then of putting it back together. So we took all of the original trim off the walls and we did the repair work, and then we put it back on. So except for places where we had to match and repair because something was missing, the trim work in the house is original. So are the floors. There were some places where the pine floor was totally missing or was water damaged. We were able to relocate some attic floorboards strategically to different places in the house so that all the hardwood floors in the house are original. They were there when we bought it. And then these are a few pictures from Richard Finkelstein, who was a photographer who posted these on our Facebook page. And this was from an open house that we did when we were partway through the repair and restoration process. So you can see the inside of the walls. Just a really amazing feat of construction at that time. One of the updates and changes we decided to make for sustainability and for the look matching original in the early 1800s was to custom order replacement windows. So the windows in the house when we bought it were the 2/2 on the right, which were replacement windows from probably the late 1800s. And so we decided to get new windows that would be energy efficient and easy to open and close and clean. And we had them made to match the originals in the oldest picture of the house, which would have been small pane windows like that. I think 2 of 36 windows in the entire house were actually the same dimensions. Here's the beautiful front door. There was a wastewater pipe that had been put in the front hallway. Up in the ceiling above was a toilet drain where the floor joist was just cut out in the middle to put the floor drain in. So we had a lot of things that we needed to, a lot of pipes to hide when we were doing the repair work. These are wood panels that were painted with a hand-painted wood grain look that were hidden behind 3 layers of paint. And in a few places where they were scratched away, we saw that beauty peeking through. And so my family and I scraped by hand that paint off. And then we're able to restore them pretty well, and what you see on the right. So here's the parlor on the left, as we had bought the house with all that paint covering up those beautiful panels. Here's the parlor on the right with those dark wood panels back on. Before, this is the front hallway on the left, and after on the right. In many places in the house, we simply had a floor sander just get off a little bit of the scuffed up top layer and then just put a clear coat of finish on. So the floors came out beautifully. This is the master bedroom on the second floor, before on the left and after on the right. This is the second floor landing, before on the left, after on the right. The before picture is down below. This was a room in the rear section of the house that had been particularly damaged with water, and we turned it into our kitchen. This is the room with the cooking hearth in the rear section of the house. The entire floor was concrete, which wasn't original. So Benjamin jackhammered out all the concrete, and we lifted it out. And what we discovered underneath the concrete was a whole treasure pile of cut limestones that that Margaret and Mildred, who grew up in the house, believe was probably where the stone walls went that used to be on the edge of the courtyard in the backyard, and they were no more when we bought the house. So they're appearing in some landscaping as we're rebuilding some of those walls outside. This is our family just a couple of years ago, soon after we moved into the house. We moved in the summer of 2021. So thank you so much for listening. I would love to engage with your questions and answer as best I can.
How had it fallen into such disrepair in just a few decades, and why hadn't it been lived in prior to you buying it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't completely know the dynamics of the family who had owned it previously. It was owned by a gentleman who was a dairy farmer in the area. Sam Shank was his name. And then when he passed away, it went to his sons. And I think, and they didn't farm as dairy farmers anymore. So my sense is that they didn't have a need for a farmhouse at that particular place. Some of you might know Randy and Janet Shank, who had Shank's Bakery here in Harrisonburg, and who also sold produce at the farmer's market. The fields were farmed for that farmer's market stand, but the house and the barn were not used, for the dairy purpose anymore. Yeah. Thankfully, they kept a good roof on the house, so the water damage was mostly what could kind of get in from the edges, and most of the house, this is why we decided to buy it, was actually structurally in really good condition for its age. They thought it was probably 1999 or 2000. Mm-hmm. And that would have been the end of a long series of renters or farm workers who had worked the dairy, and then they had rented the house out as well. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What is the condition of the indigenous people's mound across 42?
Yeah, I wonder if there's anybody here who maybe knows a little more about that than I do. So it's on private land, and I've tried through a couple people I know to get access to it and visit it, and we haven't been able to get through to the right people. So I don't know the answer to that. Anybody want to speak to that? Okay. All right. Does it say, do you want? Okay. All right.
I would, are you implying that all of the enslaved people lived in the L part of the house or the separate house, or were there additional slave quarters on the property?
Thanks for that question. We can see a number of other buildings in old photographs that appear like they could have also been living quarters. So I doubt that that one structure would have housed everyone.
My question is about the incentives that are available to someone who wants to do this type of effort that you and your husband and your family have undertaken for this type of property, and what types of restrictions are in place for that type of work?
Yeah, thanks for that great question. That's something we learned a lot about right after we first purchased the property. So because the house was on the state and the historic registers of historic places, we assumed that meant that there were going to be a lot of restrictions. We couldn't move a wall, we couldn't make certain changes. Actually, what we learned was that the only time those restrictions are in place is when a house is part of a historic district. Because this house is out in the middle of the countryside, it's not in a historic district, actually there were no regulations at all to what we could or could not do. We would have been eligible for a state preservation tax credit of 25% of all of the money that we spent on the restoration and repairs if we would have adhered to the regulations of the Virginia Department of Historic Resources. So we met with those folks a couple of times early on. They were wonderful in looking through the house with us. And the place where we decided not to go that route was that we could not have replaced the windows. Even though they weren't original, they were old enough that we couldn't replace them, and we wouldn't have been able to insulate the house. And we decided for the tax credits we'd get, we would burn through that in heating and cooling costs. So we elected for energy efficiency and did our very best to keep the house looking historically accurate. Yeah.
I have a couple questions. The first one is, have you noticed any hauntings or like spiritual phenomena maybe?
I love that question. And we get that question quite a bit. Have we encountered any ghosts? Have we noticed any beings in a spiritual realm inhabiting the place with us? The answer is no. And at Eastern Mennonite Seminary, I teach in the area of Christian spirituality. And so I feel that I'm a person who's pretty attuned to spiritual presence. And I'm very aware of the lasting legacy of people who have lived in that house. I walk around thinking about other feet that have trod the stairs and have opened the doorknobs and have used that handrail all the time. And no one has ever introduced themselves to me or our family members. We have heard from people who have been in the house before a number of years ago that they had experienced a haunting. So, yeah.
My second question is, do you know anything about the Baxter house, the neighbors, that old place next across?
The log cabin. Okay, so there is a log cabin that was built by a veteran of maybe the Civil War. Do you know which it was?
think it was
As
the
you're asking.
Revolution.
Was it the Revolution? Okay. Oh, actually, you're right. I am aware of that. That house was built within 2 years of ours. Now that, yeah. Thank you for jogging my memory. So there is a log cabin that is across Route 42 and just to the south of where the Lincoln Homestead is. The only thing I know about that is I met a lovely family who purchased it about a year ago. They invited us to walk through it, and they shared about how they were renovating the inside of the house for their family and how much they loved the history of it. I don't really know anything else about it.
I just wanted to mention, I'm pretty sure that the founder of Washington and Lee University was born there and grew up in that house.
Wow, amazing. Okay.
So there might be some interesting. My last question is, have you gotten any angry or less than positive maybe reactions for the renovation part of your work?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. We have something like 3,000 followers on our social media accounts. And so that's where this shows up. So sometimes I try to make a post about once a week. We've been busy outside and I haven't done such a great job this year. But I will post pictures of what we've been doing. And that's where every once in a while, somebody will complain that we haven't held true to historic preservation. And then it's so interesting. I don't even have to reply. Dozens of enthusiastic people jump on those comments and they say, but this house would have been in the ground if it hadn't been for this family. And they've done a great job with the resources they had, etc. So yeah, no one has said it to me directly. People who come through the house are so encouraging and give such affirmation. We just appreciate that so much because of all the hard work we've put into it. But yeah, there are definitely a few people who point out that we haven't done everything to the letter of the law. And we recognize that we were never, we knew that we couldn't do that anyway. Yeah.
We have a question online. Is there any record of Union troops on the property during the Civil War?
Yes.
And if so, what happened there?
Yes. So my awareness of this is in the history book, Shenandoah Burning. There's a page or two in there about the Lincoln Homestead, where Union troops came. This would have been after Colonel Abraham had passed away, and his widow Mary was still living there, and it was still a plantation. And it references that it kind of details the loss of crops and the burning of a barn and one other farm building. So yes, part of the buildings at the Lincoln Homestead were burned in that campaign.
Thank
Yep.
you.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I understand you to have said that Thomas Lincoln, President Lincoln's father, was born here, right?
Yeah, not in the house, but in another house where the family lived on the other side of the Linville Creek.
All right. Is there any evidence or record that Abraham Lincoln himself, President Lincoln, visited here?
He didn't visit this house. However, his son came to the valley later and showed up at the Lincoln Inn, which is a couple of miles away, just trying to kind of reconstruct, here's more re-story-ation, his family history to understand. The president was writing some letter correspondence with a Virginia congressman before his presidency, trying to figure out who his relatives were and exactly where they lived here in the Shenandoah Valley. And then that correspondence fell apart as he became president and the Civil War broke out. Yeah. Dr. Phil Stone tells some great snippets about how much the Virginia Lincolns hated the president, even though he was their relative. That made it all the worse. Yeah. Yeah.
Are you going to do any more houses now that you're done with this?
I doubt it. I don't think we'll be restoring any more houses.
Your children will buy one and you'll be the one who's helping.
Maybe that.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And thank you for your great questions. This was a wonderful presentation. It's really exciting to have seen it from the front end. And I remember, wasn't Mildred there because I was standing by the wall that had her name on it or
Yeah,
something?
that's
and
right.
they brought her along and
Yep.
it was like, oh my gosh, she's here, she's here. So it was really quite the talk about trying to build connections through history. Really, really exciting day. It still kind of gives me chills. Thank you so much for coming this evening. I want to mention that because of the county fair here in Rockingham County, we do not have a third Thursday talk in August. So I generally call them our mostly monthly third Thursday talks, but we will be back in September. So I hope to see you back then, and thank you so much for your attention this evening.